In a mansion surrounded by silence and secrets, a father tries to rebuild his life alongside his new wife. But something strange begins to happen when his daughter starts having nightly crises and fear of the dark. A hidden room, a disturbing recording, and a cruel truth reveal the dark side of the woman who claimed to protect. What was supposed to be a safe home becomes the epicenter of silent horror, until a door opens and changes everything. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching us from. We continue. The sun was slowly setting over the vast coffee plantations of the Palm Grove estate, a centuries-old property in rural Yorkshire. The colonial mansion, with its thick walls and high windows, stood imposingly atop a hill surrounded by oak and willow trees that swayed gently in the afternoon breeze. That land had belonged to the Mendonça family for generations, and now it was in the hands of Bernard, a 45-year-old man whose dark eyes carried the weight of a deep sadness. Since Cecilia, his wife, disappeared during a storm 2 years ago when her car was swept away by the River Ouse, Bernard had become merely the shadow of the joyful man he once was. A respected agronomist in the region, he had immersed himself in work as a way to escape reality, leaving the administration of the house to Mrs. Irene, the housekeeper who had served the family for over 2 decades. It was late afternoon when Louise, the couple's 8-year-old daughter, watched the horizon from the veranda, her small fingers clutching the butterfly-shaped pendant that had belonged to her mother. The girl with dark curls and almond-shaped eyes rarely smiled since the incident with her mother, and nights were marked by nightmares that made her wake up screaming, sweating, terrified by shadows that seemed to move across the walls of her room. "Louise, it's almost dinner time. Your father will be home soon from the office in York," said Mrs. Irene, approaching with slow steps. The grey-haired woman with hands calloused by work was the only bond of affection left to the girl in that enormous, silent house. "Mommy's butterfly came to visit me today," the child murmured, pointing to the garden where blue butterflies danced among the flowers. "She told me she's sad because she doesn't like the dark." Mrs. Irene sat beside the girl, adjusting her apron over her simple dress. She knew those fantasies well. They were Louise's way of keeping her mother present. "You know, my little one, butterflies rest when it gets dark, just like us. There's no need to be afraid of the night," she said gently, stroking the girl's curls. "But what about the noises and the shadows on the walls?" Before the housekeeper could answer, the sound of tires on gravel announced the arrival of a car. It wasn't Bernard's Jeep, but an elegant silver sedan that parked in front of the house. From it descended a woman of approximately 35 years, with straight black hair falling over her shoulders. She wore a light pantsuit and blazer, and her slender heels echoed on the veranda floor as she approached with a studied smile. "Hello, you must be Louise. I'm Deborah, a friend of your father's." The girl instinctively recoiled against Mrs. Irene, who stood up with an expression of surprise. Bernard hadn't mentioned visitors. "Good afternoon, madam. Mr. Bernard is not home at the moment, but he should arrive soon. May I offer you some coffee while you wait?" the housekeeper asked, assessing the stranger with suspicious eyes. "That would be lovely, thank you," Deborah replied, without taking her penetrating gaze off the girl. "Your father told me a lot about you, Louise. He said you're very brave." Louise didn't respond, clutching the butterfly pendant even tighter between her fingers. There was something in that woman's gaze that made her uncomfortable, as if she was being evaluated. Minutes later, Bernard's Jeep appeared on the dirt road. Seeing the sedan parked, his face showed a mixture of surprise and embarrassment. He quickly got out, adjusting his wrinkled jacket and wind-blown hair. "Deborah, I didn't expect to see you today," he said, walking quickly towards the veranda. "Sorry to drop by unannounced, Bernard," she replied with a melodious voice, standing up to greet him with a kiss on the cheek. "I was in the area visiting the reforestation project and thought I'd stop by to see how the preparations for the charity dinner were coming along." Bernard nodded, visibly tense. Of course, come to my study. We can talk better there." As the adults moved away, Mrs. Irene noticed Deborah's gaze at the house. It wasn't the look of a simple visitor, but of someone evaluating every detail, every corner, as if already planning changes. 2 weeks passed, and Deborah's visits became more frequent. Bernard explained to his daughter and the housekeeper that she was a psychologist and director of a foundation that worked with traumatized children, exactly the kind of help Louise needed, according to him. One rainy afternoon, while Louise played in the library with her coloring books, she overheard the adults' conversation in the next room. "Bernard, you can't go on like this," Deborah was saying in a firm tone. "The girl needs structure, someone to help her overcome what happened. The nightmares, the night fears, they are reflections of unresolved trauma. The more you protect Louise from the truth, the harder it will be for her to accept reality. I know, but she's so small, and I can barely stay home. The company demands all my attention now that we're expanding internationally. If only Cecilia were here." "But she's not, Bernard." Deborah's voice softened, becoming almost a whisper. "And you need to move on. Louise needs a maternal figure, someone who understands childhood trauma and can help her process the loss." There was a moment of silence, and then Bernard sighed deeply. "What do you suggest?" "Let me stay here for a while. As a therapist, I can work with Louise daily. I have specific methods for children who have experienced trauma. Besides, I can help with the preparations for the charity dinner for the foundation. It will be good for your image with the investors." Mrs. Irene, who was passing through the corridor with a pile, "Shave clean laundry," stopped when she heard those words. A shiver ran down her spine. There was something in that woman's voice, a coldness disguised as compassion, that deeply bothered her. That night, during dinner, Bernard made the announcement that would change the course of their lives. "Louise, Deborah will be staying with us for a while. She's going to help you with the nightmares and the bad feeling you have at night." The girl looked at her father with wide eyes, then at Deborah, who smiled serenely from the other side of the table. Mrs. Irene squeezed the napkin between her fingers, watching the scene with apprehension. "We're going to have a lot of fun together," Deborah said, reaching her hand across the table to touch Louise's. "And soon you won't be afraid of the dark anymore. I promise." The little girl instinctively pulled back her hand, feeling a tightness in her chest. That night, as the rain lashed against the windows of the Palm Grove estate, Louise had the worst nightmare of all. She dreamed of a butterfly trapped in a dark box, desperately beating its wings against the walls, trying to find an exit. That didn't exist. The first rays of sun entered through the gaps in the curtains when Louise woke with a start. She had dreamed again of the trapped butterfly, but this time the box was darker and smaller. Her heart was still pounding when the bedroom door opened, revealing not Mrs. Irene's familiar face, but Deborah's calculated smile. "Good morning, little one. Did you sleep well?" Deborah entered without waiting for an answer, opening the curtains with a brusque movement that flooded the room with morning light. She wore a navy blue silk ensemble, and her hair was impeccably styled, as if she had been awake for hours. "I had a nightmare," Louise murmured, clutching her butterfly pendant. "Nightmares are just messages from our unconscious," Deborah replied, sitting on the edge of the bed. "They show us what we need to face. Starting today, we're going to work on that together." The routine at the Palm Grove estate began to subtly change in the following weeks. Deborah gradually took control of the house, reorganizing schedules, altering menus, and, most importantly, establishing new rules for Louise. The therapy sessions, as she called them, began simply conversations about the absent mother, drawings, to express feelings, breathing exercises. Bernard, increasingly absent due to expanding business, seemed relieved to see someone taking on responsibilities he couldn't face. During his quick visits to the estate, Deborah presented optimistic reports on Louise's progress, displaying colorful drawings and meticulous notes about each session. "She's processing her grief in a healthy way," Deborah explained to Bernard one evening as they shared a bottle of wine on the veranda. "But there's still a lot of work to be done. The fear of the dark is a classic symptom of unresolved trauma." From the other side of the half-open door, Mrs. Irene listened to the conversation with growing concern. In recent days, she had noticed changes in Louise's behavior. The girl, once curious and talkative even in her sadness, now seemed withdrawn, almost fearful. Several times the housekeeper had tried to talk to the child alone, but Deborah always appeared, interrupting with her intimidating presence disguised as cordiality. "I'm thinking of adapting the old grain store into a special therapy room," Deborah continued, moving closer to Bernard on the veranda bench. A controlled space where we can work with Louise's fears more intensively. The one near the stream. It's been abandoned for years, Bernard replied, slightly intoxicated by the wine and Deborah's perfume. Do as you see fit. I trust your professional judgment. The next morning, workers arrived at the estate. For an entire week, the sound of hammers and saws filled the property. Louise watched the activities from afar, feeling an inexplicable tightness in her chest every time she saw materials being transported to the old storehouse. "What are they doing there, Mrs. Irene?" the girl asked while they had breakfast in the kitchen, taking advantage of Deborah's temporary absence. The housekeeper hesitated, carefully choosing her words. "It seems Dr. Deborah is preparing a place for you two to work together." "I don't like her," Louise whispered, glancing nervously at the door. "She smiles, but her eyes don't smile." Mrs. Irene hugged the girl, feeling a lump in her throat. "Louise, if anything makes you scared or uncomfortable, you tell me, all right? No matter what it is." Before she could say more, the sound of heels in the corridor announced Deborah's arrival. She entered the kitchen with a folder of documents under her arm and a smile that didn't reach her cold eyes. "Good morning, Louise. Today we have a special day. Our therapy room is ready and we're going to start the desensitization exercises." "What's that?" the girl asked, holding Mrs. Irene's hand tightly. "It's a method to help people overcome their fears," Deborah explained, with a studied calm. "In your case, the fear of the dark. We'll work on it gradually until you no longer feel afraid." That afternoon, Deborah took Louise to the old storehouse, now transformed into a white and seemingly cozy room. There were colorful cushions on the floor, shelves with children's books and a small sound system. But what caught the eye were the windows. All had been covered with metal plates, allowing the room to be completely darkened with the flick of a switch. "See? It's a controlled and safe environment," Deborah said, showing the space to the girl who stayed close to the door. "We'll start slowly. Today we'll only stay 5 minutes with the light reduced, not completely dark." The first sessions seemed harmless. Deborah gradually reduced the light intensity while telling stories or doing breathing exercises with Louise. The girl, though tense, managed to endure the short periods of twilight. However, as the weeks passed, something began to change in the sessions. The duration of the darkness increased, and the stories told by Deborah became more disturbing. Tales of lost, abandoned children who needed to find strength to survive alone. "Strength comes from solitude, Louise," Deborah would say in one of these sessions, her voice almost hypnotic in the dark. "Your mother is no longer here to protect you. You need to learn to be strong alone." One day, after one of these particularly intense sessions, Louise returned home pale and silent. When Mrs. Irene went to bring her a snack in her room, she found the girl curled up under the covers, trembling. "What happened, my angel?" the housekeeper asked, sitting on the edge of the bed. "She left me alone in the dark today," Louise whispered, her eyes wide with fear. "She said she was going to get water and locked the door. I kept screaming, but she didn't come back for a long time." Mrs. Irene felt the blood run cold in her veins. "How long, Louise?" "I don't know. It seemed like forever. And there was a voice." "What voice, dear?" "A voice like Mommy's, but different. It came from the speaker. It said I needed to be strong, that the dark would teach me not to have weaknesses." The housekeeper hugged the girl tightly, trying to hide her own indignation and fear. That wasn't therapy. It was psychological torture. That night, after Louise finally fell asleep, Mrs. Irene decided to investigate the therapy room on her own. She waited until the lights of the main house went out. Deborah had gone out to dinner with Bernard in York, so the housekeeper would have a few hours to find out what was really happening in that place. She grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen and walked silently through the garden to the old storehouse. The door was locked, but Mrs. Irene knew the estate better than anyone. She knew there was a service entrance, formerly used to ventilate the storehouse. It was small, but enough for a thin person to pass through. With effort, the old woman managed to get into the building. What she found made her heart clench. The seemingly cozy room she had glimpsed days ago hid another reality when illuminated only by the faint light of the flashlight. On the white walls, There were scratch marks, as if someone had desperately tried to find a way out in the dark. A small recorder was connected to the sound system, and next to it, a chair with restraints disguised as safety supports. With trembling hands, Mrs. Irene pressed the recorder button. The voice that came out of the speakers was a disturbing imitation of Cecilia's voice, clearly digitally manipulated. "Louise, the dark is your friend now. Mommy can't help you anymore. You need to learn to be strong alone." Tears streamed down the housekeeper's wrinkled face as she turned off the device with repulsion. In the corner of the room, a small camera recorded everything, connected to a computer where several video files were stored. Mrs. Irene quickly connected the USB drive she always carried with her, a gift from her grandson who had taught her to save important photos, and copied the latest files. As the data was transferred, she noticed a folder of documents on the table. Leafing through it quickly, she found something that made her heart almost stop. They weren't therapeutic reports, but detailed spreadsheets of Bernard's assets, valuations of the estate and businesses, and a draft power of attorney that would give Deborah broad powers over the family's affairs in case of the owner's temporary incapacitation. It was then that she heard the sound of a car approaching on the dirt road. Mrs. Irene hastily gathered the documents, made sure the USB drive had completed the transfer, and put it in her apron pocket. She turned off the flashlight and exited through the same opening she had used to enter, hiding among the bushes as the car parked in front of the main house. It was Deborah's vehicle, but to her surprise, Bernard was not with her. An unknown man got out of the passenger side, tall, wearing dark glasses even at that time of night, dressed in an impeccable suit. Mrs. Irene approached cautiously, hiding behind the trees to listen to the conversation. "Everything is going according to plan," Deborah said, her voice now stripped of the artificial sweetness she used with the family. "Bernard is completely involved. He believes I'm helping his daughter, when in reality, I'm preparing the groundwork for our next step." "What about the girl?" the man asked, lighting a cigarette. "An easy problem to solve. The therapy exercises are breaking her resistance. Soon she'll be so fragile that any psychological report would deem her emotionally unstable. With her institutionalized and Bernard, let's say, unavailable, the path will be clear for us to take control of the businesses." "Excellent. The Chinese investors are impatient. We need those lands for the mining project, and the cleanest way to get them is through a legal transfer of ownership." Mrs. Irene covered her mouth to stifle a gasp of horror. The Mendoza estate had one of the largest water reserves in the region, as well as fertile lands that apparently concealed valuable minerals. The plan was clear now. Deborah wasn't a therapist trying to help a traumatized child. She was part of a scheme to take control of the property and the family's businesses. "And old Mendoza?" the man asked, flicking his cigarette butt to the ground. "He's already receiving small doses of something special in the wine we share," Deborah replied with a cold smile. "Nothing that leaves traces, just enough to cause mental confusion, forgetfulness, perhaps some accidents. Soon he himself will believe he's losing the ability to manage his affairs. And the old housekeeper, she seems suspicious. Mrs. Irene, a temporary nuisance. I've already talked to Bernard about retiring her. I told him she's too old to adequately care for Louise during her treatment. Tomorrow, I'll dismiss her with a generous severance package." The man nodded, satisfied. "Perfect. I'll be in town until we conclude this phase. Keep me informed." They said goodbye, and the man left in a taxi that was waiting on the road. Deborah entered the house, leaving Mrs. Irene paralyzed among the bushes, her heart pounding and her mind racing a mile a minute. The housekeeper knew she had little time to act. She returned silently to the house and went straight to her small room in the back. From a sewing box, she took out an old cell phone she used to talk to her relatives. She hesitated for a moment. What could she do? Who would believe the word of a housekeeper against a respected psychologist? It was then that she remembered Joachim Atherton, the Mendoza family's former lawyer, who had stepped aside when Deborah began to influence Bernard to change legal representatives. Joachim and Mrs. Irene had always had a relationship of mutual respect, and the lawyer often commented that the housekeeper was the eyes and ears of the house. With trembling fingers, she dialed the number she still had in her address book. "Joachim? It's Irene from the Palm Grove estate. We need to talk urgently. Yes, it's about Mr. Bernard and little Louise. They are in danger." The next morning, Mrs. Irene woke before dawn, determined to act while she still could. She went to Louise's room and found her sleeping restlessly, muttering disconnected words in her sleep. She sat gently on the edge of the bed and stroked her hair until the girl woke up. "Mrs. Irene," Louise murmured, rubbing her sleepy eyes. "Yes, my dear, listen, I need you to be very brave today," the housekeeper said in a low voice. "We're going to play a special game, all right?" "What game?" the girl asked, suddenly alert. "It's called Secret Messages. I want you to draw today, many drawings, but in each one hide a message for your father, something only the two of you would understand. It can be about your mother's butterfly or any special memory you share." "Like a spy mission?" Louise's eyes lit up slightly. It was the first sign of genuine interest Mrs. Irene had seen in weeks. "Exactly like a spy mission, and it's very important that Dr. Deborah doesn't realize their messages. To her, they should just look like ordinary drawings." Louise nodded, feeling part of something important for the first time since she had started treatments with Deborah. During breakfast, the girl remained quiet as usual, but her eyes had a different, almost conspiratorial gleam when she exchanged glances with the housekeeper. As expected, Deborah appeared in the kitchen impeccably dressed and with her calculated smile. "Good morning, everyone, Louise. Today we'll have a special session. We're going to work with art therapy before continuing our exposure exercises." "Drawings?" the girl asked, feigning disinterest while playing with her cereal in the bowl. "Yes, drawings that express your feelings. It will be fun," Deborah replied, pouring herself coffee. Then, turning to Mrs. Irene, she added with false cordiality, "By the way, Mrs. Irene, we need to talk after breakfast. I have some suggestions for your routine." The housekeeper nodded silently, knowing exactly what that conversation would mean. As she tidied the kitchen, she watched Deborah lead Louise to the living room where she set up papers and colored pencils on the table. Throughout the morning, Louise drew obediently. Scenes of the estate, animals, and in each drawing, as agreed, she hid small messages for her father. In one drawing of the mansion, she wrote tiny letters on the windows forming the phrase, "She is not good." In another, of a flying bird, the pattern of the clouds formed the word, "Help." Deborah watched with interest, occasionally taking notes, completely oblivious to the hidden messages. "Very good, Louise. Your drawings are full of interesting symbolism. This one, for example," she pointed to a drawing of the therapy room, where Louise had discreetly drawn chains on the walls, "shows how you feel trapped by your fears. We're making progress." At noon, Deborah finally called Mrs. Irene for the dreaded conversation. She led her to the library, closing the door to ensure privacy. "Mrs. Irene, I've noticed you seem quite tired lately," Deborah began with false concern. "Bernard and I talked, and we thought it would be appropriate to offer you early retirement. After all, you've served this family faithfully for so long." The housekeeper maintained a neutral expression, despite her racing heart. "It's very kind of you to worry, Dr. Deborah, but I still feel perfectly capable of taking care of the house and Louise." "It's not a matter of capability," Deborah replied, her tone softening dangerously. "It's a matter of adaptation. Louise's treatment requires specific methods, and I've noticed you've resisted some of my approaches." "I'm just concerned for the girl's well-being," Mrs. Irene replied calmly, as anyone who loves her would be. Something darkened in Deborah's eyes, a flash of irritation that she quickly disguised. "Well, either way, the decision is made. You will receive a generous severance package, and I will arrange a driver to take you to town today. Your belongings can be sent later." "I understand," Mrs. Irene replied, maintaining her dignity. "I would just like to say a proper goodbye to Louise and Mr. Bernard. Bernard is in an important meeting in London. As for Louise, a prolonged farewell would only make things harder for her. I suggest you pack your essential belongings while I prepare the girls' lunch. The driver will be here at 2:00. With that, Deborah left the library, making it clear that the conversation was over. Mrs. Irene remained seated for a few minutes, taking deep breaths to calm her nerves. Deborah's plan was progressing faster than she had imagined. She needed to act now. She went to her room and quickly packed some belongings in a small suitcase. Among them, she carefully hid the USB drive with the evidence and an old iron key that belonged to the back entrance of the main house, an almost forgotten entrance that led to the old cellar, used in times when the estate produced its own wine. When she returned to the living room, she found Louise sitting alone, still drawing. Deborah had gone to the kitchen to prepare lunch. It was her chance. "Louise," she whispered, quickly approaching the girl, "I need to leave for a while, but don't worry, I'm seeking help for you and your father." The girl's eyes filled with tears. "You're not going to leave me alone with her, are you?" Mrs. Irene felt her heart clench. "Only for a short period, my angel. Be strong and continue with the drawings. And if you really need help while I'm away, do you remember the secret passage that leads to the cellar?" Louise nodded. When she was younger, she used to play hide-and-seek with the housekeeper, and the cellar was one of her favorite hiding spots, a place Deborah probably didn't know about. "Use it only if it's really necessary, and remember, your mother always said that even in the deepest dark, there's a light within us." The girl hugged Mrs. Irene tightly, as if she felt that this separation meant more than a simple farewell. The housekeeper discreetly slipped the small key into the pocket of the child's dress. "Keep this with you. It's our special key, remember?" Before they could exchange more words, they heard Deborah's footsteps returning from the kitchen. Mrs. Irene quickly moved away, pretending to arrange some cushions on the sofa. "Lunch is ready, Louise," Deborah announced. Then, turning to Mrs. Irene with a cold smile, she added, "Your transport arrived early. It's waiting at the entrance." The housekeeper nodded, picking up her small suitcase. She cast a last look at Louise, trying to convey all her determination and love. "Goodbye, my little one. We'll see each other soon." As she was led to the waiting car, Mrs. Irene looked back, observing the imposing Palm Grove estate. Behind the windows of the second floor, she saw Louise's small face pressed against the glass, her hand raised in a silent goodbye. "To York bus station, please," she said to the driver, a man of few words whom Deborah had clearly instructed. What the fake therapist didn't know was that Mrs. Irene had no intention of leaving town. She had a meeting arranged with Joachim, the lawyer, and was determined to save the Mendonza family before it was too late. As the car drove away on the dirt road, Mrs. Irene squeezed her cell phone in her pocket, silently confirming that the message she had sent earlier had been delivered. "Meeting at 3 p.m. at the town. Square Cafe. I'll bring evidence. The girl and the master are in danger." The Golden Bean Cafe, a modest establishment in York's Central Square, was almost empty that Wednesday afternoon. At a discreet table in the back, Joachim Atherton waited impatiently, checking his wristwatch every few minutes. At 65, the grey-haired lawyer with thick-rimmed glasses had dedicated almost 3 decades of his career to the Mendonza family, until he was inexplicably replaced 3 months ago. When Mrs. Irene finally entered the cafe carrying her small suitcase, relief spread across his face. He stood up to greet her, immediately noticing the paleness and fatigue in the housekeeper's expression. "Thank goodness you're all right," he said, pulling out a chair for her. "Your message deeply worried me." Mrs. Irene looked around to make sure they wouldn't be overheard, then opened her bag and carefully took out the USB drive wrapped in a handkerchief. "Here's everything, Mr. Atherton. Videos of what that woman has been doing to Louise, documents I found. She's planning something terrible." The lawyer connected the USB drive to his laptop, and as he watched the videos, his face transformed from concern to horror. The images showed Louise locked in darkness, crying and pleading to be let out, while Cecilia's manipulated voice echoed through the speaker, saying disturbing phrases about strength and overcoming weaknesses. "My God," Joachim murmured, moving on to the financial documents. "This is psychological torture. And these papers, she's preparing the ground to assume legal control over Bernard's assets. She even registered a mining company in partnership with Victor Davies." The lawyer frowned. "That name is familiar to me. He's the man I saw talking to her last night," Mrs. Irene explained. "They were talking about Chinese investors interested in the estate's lands. Something about mining." Joachim closed. his eyes for a moment remembering. Victor Davies, now I recall. He tried to negotiate with Bernard a few years ago, wanting to buy part of the estate to extract ore. Bernard categorically refused. Those lands have been in the family for generations, and he would never allow mining there, especially given the importance of the water sources for the entire region. So they found another way to get what they wanted, Mrs. Irene concluded, her voice trembling. Using Deborah to emotionally manipulate Bernard and psychologically incapacitate Louise. And with both declared mentally unstable, she would assume legal control. As guardian and wife, Joachim completed, connecting the dots. A meticulous and cruel plan. We need to do something immediately. Bernard is slowly being poisoned, and little Louise is alone with that woman. Calm down, Joachim replied thoughtfully. We need to act intelligently. If we confront Deborah directly, she might accelerate her plans or destroy evidence. And Bernard is so emotionally involved that he might not believe us without concrete evidence. The lawyer picked up the phone and made a few quick calls, first to a former colleague in the local police force, then to a private forensic laboratory, and, finally, to a retired judge who owed him some favors. I've secured a court order for a discreet investigation, he explained after the calls. A plainclothes officer accompanied by an expert will go to the estate tomorrow, ostensibly for a routine environmental inspection. Meanwhile, we'll try to locate Bernard. He's in London, according to Deborah, Mrs. Irene informed him, but I don't trust anything she says. Joachim nodded, typing quickly on his cell phone. I'll contact my nephew who works at Bernard's company. If he really is in London, we can alert him. Meanwhile, at the Palm Grove estate, the Iwab situation was deteriorating rapidly. With Mrs. Irene's departure, Deborah felt free to intensify her plan. That afternoon, after lunch, she led Louise to the therapy room for a special session. Today we're going to take a big step, Louise, she said, with false sweetness as she closed the door behind her. You'll be alone in the dark for 30 full minutes. The girl felt her heart race. I don't want to. Please, I don't want to be in the dark. This isn't a matter of wanting, dear. It's a matter of necessity, Deborah replied, her tone subtly hardening. Your mother never taught you to be strong. That's why you have these irrational fears. My mother taught me to be brave, Louise protested, feeling a spark of anger emerge amidst the fear. Mrs. Irene's words echoed in her mind. Even in the deepest dark, there's a light within us. Something in the girl's tone made Deborah narrow her eyes. Interesting. It seems old Irene has been filling your head with ideas. Well, that's over now. Sit in the chair. Louise recoiled towards the door, but found it was locked. I want to go home. You're being ridiculous. This is your therapy. Now sit down, or I'll have to tell your father that you're being deliberately difficult. With reluctance, the girl sat in the central chair, feeling her body tremble. Deborah adjusted the safety straps, in reality disguised restraints, on her wrists. This is just to make sure you don't hurt yourself in the dark, she explained with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. 30 minutes, Louise. If you can stay quiet and accept the darkness, you'll go home. If you scream or cry, the time restarts. Before the girl could protest, Deborah turned off the lights and left, locking the door. The darkness was absolute, suffocating. For a few minutes, Louise tried to be brave, breathing deeply as Mrs. Irene had taught her. But then the voice began, that grotesque imitation of her mother's voice, distorted and wrong. Louise, you're alone now, forever. There's no one to save you. Only the darkness. Accept it. The girl closed her eyes tightly, trying to block out the voice, but it seemed to come from all directions. Tears streamed down her face as she struggled against the restraints that bound her wrists. Mommy would never talk like that, she whispered, to herself. That's not her voice. Outside, Deborah monitored the session through the infrared camera, watching the child's resistance with growing irritation. Her phone vibrated. It was Victor. How's it going? He asked without preamble. Progressing. The old housekeeper has been dismissed, and I'm intensifying the sessions with the girl. In a few days, she'll be so traumatized that any psychiatrist will attest to severe emotional instability. And Bernard. The doses in the wine are taking effect. He's been having memory lapses, confusion. Last night he couldn't remember the name of his own company during dinner. Excellent. The investors have confirmed the initial deposit. As soon as we have legal control of the property, the second installment will be released. Be prepared to accelerate the process if necessary. What about the housekeeper? Aren't we at risk of her talking to someone? Who would believe an old housekeeper without proof? Victor replied with disdain. Besides, the driver dropped her off in a small town 50 kilometers from York, as instructed. By the time she manages to get back and be heard, we'll have already completed everything. Deborah smiled, ending the call. She turned her attention back to the screen where Louise was now silently crying. 10 more minutes of darkness and then we'll start preparing the documents. Tomorrow, when Bernard returns, he'll be greeted with a special dinner and an extra dose of our special recipe. In the main house, the butler Sebastian, a reserved gentleman who had worked for the Mendonça family almost as long as Mrs. Irene, observed the recent changes with silent suspicion. He had noticed Bernard's strange behavior lately. The master, who had always been meticulous and attentive to detail, now seemed confused, forgetful. That afternoon, while organizing the cellar as requested by Deborah for the special dinner the next day, Sebastian was surprised by the house phone ringing. "Mendonça residence," he answered formally. "Sebastian, Joachim Atherton here," said the voice on the other end. "I urgently need to speak with Mr. Bernard." "Mr. Atherton? What a surprise. The master is in London. He should only return tomorrow." "Are you sure about that? My nephew works at his company and says there are no meetings scheduled in London this week." Sebastian felt a shiver run down his spine. Dr. Deborah clearly mentioned he would be in London for important meetings. "Sebastian, listen carefully." Joachim's voice became grave. "Don't show anything, but we suspect something very serious is happening in that house. Mrs. Irene is here with me and has brought disturbing evidence. Bernard and the girl may be in danger." The butler nervously looked around, making sure he was alone. "The master has been acting strangely, sir. Forgets things, seems confused. And little Louise, she hasn't been the same since she started the treatments. I need you to do something for us, Sebastian, discreetly and carefully. Tomorrow morning, officials will come to the estate for a supposed environmental inspection. In reality, they will be investigating. We need you to facilitate their entry and, if possible, find out where Bernard really is." "Understood, sir. And what about the girl?" "Keep her in your sight whenever possible. Don't let Deborah perceive your suspicion." After hanging up, Sebastian remained motionless for a few moments, processing the gravity of the situation. He had worked for the Mendonças for decades, seen Louise born, witnessed the family's happiness before the tragedy with Cecilia. He would not allow more harm to come to that house. With renewed determination, the butler returned to his duties, attentive to any suspicious movement. When he passed through the main corridor, he noticed something unusual. The door to Bernard's study, normally locked, was ajar. From inside, Deborah's voice could be heard on the phone. Approaching silently, Sebastian positioned himself so he could listen without being seen. "Yes, the documents will be ready for signature tomorrow. No, he won't suspect anything. The cocktail of substances is having the perfect effect. Confusion, memory lapses, but leaving no detectable traces. The girl. She's almost at the point. 2 more intensive sessions and any psychiatrist will attest to severe emotional trauma and the need for institutionalization. No, the housekeeper won't be a problem. She's far away and lacks credibility. As for the other employees, they are all easily replaceable after the property transfer." Sebastian moved away silently, his heart pounding hard against his chest. The situation was even worse than he had imagined. He returned to the cellar and, pretending to organize the wines, carefully examined the bottles Deborah had set aside for the next day's dinner. On one of them, he noticed an almost imperceptible residue on the bottleneck, a whitish powder that shouldn't be there. Carefully, the butler collected a small sample in a clean handkerchief, putting it in his pocket. Then he swapped the bottle for an identical one, making sure they were in the same position. Upstairs, Louise had finally been released from the therapy session, returning to her room pale and exhausted. When Sebastian brought her a snack, He found the girl curled up in bed, clutching the butterfly pendant. "Are you all right, Miss Louise?" he asked gently, placing the tray on the bedside table. The girl looked up, assessing if she could trust him. "Sebastian, do you believe there are bad people who seem good?" The butler sat carefully on the edge of the bed. "Yes, little one. Unfortunately, there are." "Dr. Deborah isn't good," Louise whispered. "She leaves me in the dark and says bad things with a voice like Mommy's, but it's not Mommy." "I know," Sebastian replied, lowering his voice even further. "Mrs. Irene knows too, and she's seeking help. I need you to be very brave and patient. Help is on the way." A glimmer of hope appeared in the girl's eyes. "Really? Mrs. Irene didn't abandon me?" "Never. She risked a lot to protect you. Now eat something and rest. Stay in your room as much as possible, and if you need anything, call for me, not her." Louise nodded, feeling less alone for the first time in days. As Sebastian was about to leave, she called him again. "Sebastian, do you know where my father is? He said he'd be back today, but Deborah said he's only coming tomorrow." The butler hesitated, worried about the answer. "I'm not sure, little one, but we'll find out soon." Meanwhile, in a private clinic on the outskirts of York, Bernard Mendonça slowly awoke from an induced sleep, feeling disoriented and confused. He looked around the sterile room, trying to understand where he was and how he had gotten there. "Ah, you've finally woken up," a nurse said, approaching with a professional smile. "How are you feeling, Mr. Mendonça?" Where am I?" he asked in a hoarse voice. "At St. Teresa's clinic. You were admitted last night by your wife. She explained that you had an acute confusional episode and needed medical observation." "Wife?" Bernard frowned, trying to organize his hazy thoughts. "Cecilia?" "Mrs. Deborah," the nurse corrected, checking his vital signs. "She seemed very concerned, said she's noticed worrying changes in your behavior in recent weeks. The doctor will come to assess you soon to determine if we can discharge you or if a longer period of observation will be necessary." Bernard closed his eyes, trying to remember recent events. His memory was fragmented, like scattered puzzle pieces. He vaguely remembered a dinner with Deborah, feeling extremely sleepy after a few glasses of wine. "My daughter," he said suddenly, trying to sit up. "Louise, I need to see my daughter." "Calm down, Mr. Mendonça," the nurse replied, gently pushing him back onto the bed. "Your wife assured us that the girl is well cared for. Now you need to rest." As the nurse left the room, Bernard looked out the window where the sun was beginning to set. An unexplained feeling of urgency grew in his chest. Something was deeply wrong, and he needed to go home before it was too late. Thursday morning dawned with a fine drizzle covering the Palm Grove estate. Sebastian had been up since 5, restless and vigilant. During the night he had discreetly checked all the rooms in the house, confirming his suspicions. Bernard was indeed nowhere on the property. At precisely 8 o'clock, as Joachim had promised, a Department of Environmental Affairs jeep parked in front of the main house. 2 men got out, one in official uniform and another in civilian clothes carrying an equipment case. "Good morning," the official greeted, presenting documents to the butler who received them at the door. "We're here for the quarterly environmental inspection of the water sources. The owner was notified last week." Sebastian nodded, recognizing between the lines that this was the plan Joachim had mentioned. "Certainly. Mr. Bernard is not here, but he left instructions for you to have full access to the necessary areas." "Who are these men, Sebastian?" Deborah asked, appearing on the stairs in a silk robe and a displeased expression. "From the Department of Environmental Affairs, madam. Routine inspection of the water sources and reserves," the butler replied calmly. Deborah forced a smile, but her eyes remained cold and calculating. "I see. Well, I don't want to interrupt your work, gentlemen. Sebastian, accompany them and offer coffee when they finish." The men thanked him and followed the butler outside, towards the water sources that were approximately 500 meters from the main house, conveniently passing the path that led to the old storehouse, converted into a therapy room. When they were sufficiently distant from the house, the plainclothesman introduced himself. "I am Detective Maurice Carter, and this is forensic expert Ronald Meyer. Joachim has apprised us of the situation." "Thank goodness," Sebastian sighed, relieved. The situation is serious, Detective. I believe Mr. Bernard is slowly being poisoned and little Louise is being subjected to some kind of psychological torture. We have a court order for a discreet investigation, the detective explained, showing the document. We're going to first examine this so-called therapy room, then we'll need samples of the drinks Mr. Mendonza regularly consumes. I've already separated this, Sebastian said, taking the handkerchief with the sample of powder found in the wine bottle from his pocket. I found this residue in a bottle specially set aside for tonight's dinner. The expert carefully took the handkerchief. Excellent, I'll analyze it immediately with the portable equipment. If there are suspicious substances, we'll have sufficient reason for more direct action. Arriving at the old storehouse, they found the door locked. She keeps the key with her, the butler explained. That won't be a problem, the detective replied, who skillfully used a set of small tools to pick the lock in a matter of minutes. The interior of the room in daylight was even more disturbing than in the images captured by Mrs. Irene. The white walls, the chair with disguised restraints, the sound system, and the hidden camera. Everything was meticulously organized to appear therapeutic at first glance, but with clear elements of coercion and psychological manipulation. My God, the detective murmured, examining the equipment. This isn't legitimate exposure therapy. It's abuse. Forensic expert Ronald connected a device to the room's computer and began copying all the files. We have the videos of the sessions, documents, and... Here, look at this. He pointed to a digital folder titled Palm Grove Project. Detailed plans for mining on the property, assessments of the area's mineral potential, and even a preliminary contract with Chinese investors. While the expert collected the digital evidence, the detective found the recorder with the manipulated voice. When he pressed the play button, everyone fell silent, horrified by the distorted messages supposedly coming from Louise's deceased mother. This is calculated cruelty, the detective concluded, turning off the device with repulsion. We have more than enough here for an immediate arrest. What about Mr. Bernard? Sebastian asked, anxiously. We still don't know where he is. The detective's phone rang at that moment. It was Joachim. We found him, Maurice. He's hospitalized at St. Teresa's Clinic on the outskirts of York. Deborah admitted him yesterday, claiming an acute confusional episode. We're on our way with a court order for his release. Excellent. Keep at it. We're collecting evidence here and should have everything ready in approximately an hour, the detective replied before hanging up. Back at the main house, Deborah observed the movements of the supposed environmental inspectors from the second-floor window with growing suspicion. Something in Sebastian's behavior and the time they were spending near the storehouse triggered an alert in her trained mind. She picked up the phone and quickly called Victor. I think we have a problem, she said without preamble. 2 men from the Department of Environmental Affairs are on the property, but they're more interested in the area around the storehouse than the water sources. Stay calm, Victor replied. It might just be a coincidence. Either way, we're almost done. The documents are ready, and as soon as Bernard is back, we'll have him sign them. After that, it won't matter who suspects what. What if it's not a coincidence? Deborah insisted, watching the men now returning towards the house. I'm going to accelerate the plan. I'll bring the girl for the final session now, and then I'll pick Bernard up from the clinic. If he's still confused enough, I'll get the signatures today. Do it. I'll be at the estate in 2 hours with the final contracts and the notary. After hanging up, Deborah took a deep breath, composing herself. She had to act naturally. She went to Louise's room and knocked on the door with her usual false sweetness. Louise, it's time for our special session. There was no answer. Frowning, Deborah opened the door only to find the room empty. The bed was made, but there was no sign of the girl. Louise, she called louder, beginning to search the neighboring rooms. Where are you, dear? Downstairs, Sebastian heard Deborah's hurried footsteps and exchanged significant glances with the detective and the expert, who had just entered the house. The girl isn't here, he whispered. She must have hidden. We need to buy time, the detective replied in a low voice. The judge is issuing the official search and arrest warrants, but they won't arrive for approximately an hour. Deborah appeared at the top of the stairs, her face a mask of concern that didn't entirely conceal the fury in her eyes. Sebastian, have you seen Louise? I can't find her anywhere. No, madam. Perhaps she's in the garden or the library. You know how she likes to hide with her books. Deborah quickly descended the stairs, noticing the presence of the inspectors. Have you finished your inspection, gentlemen? Almost, the detective replied with studied casualness. We just need to check the quality of the house's water as well. Standard procedure. Of course, do what's necessary, she replied distractedly, already heading to the library. Sebastian, help me look for Louise, please. We have an important therapy session today. The butler nodded and followed Deborah, discreetly signaling to the detective to take the opportunity to continue collecting evidence. The search of the house continued for 20 minutes, with Deborah becoming visibly more agitated with each passing minute. Finally, in the entrance hall, she stopped abruptly before the butler. This is very strange, Sebastian. The girl has never disappeared like this before. Are you sure you haven't seen her? Or perhaps helped her? Hide? The accusatory tone did not go unnoticed. Not at all, madam. I am as concerned as you are. At that moment, the house phone rang. Sebastian answered, and his expression subtly changed upon hearing the voice on the other end. It's for you, madam, he said, handing the phone to Deborah. Dr. Chambers from St. Teresa's Clinic. Deborah took the phone, turning her back to the butler in an attempt at privacy. Yes, doctor. How is my husband? What? What do you mean he's been released? Who authorized it? A court order. Deborah's voice rose in alarm. No, there must be some mistake. My husband needs medical observation. He has been showing worrying symptoms. No, listen. She stopped suddenly, realizing the call had been disconnected. She turned slowly, finding not only Sebastian's attentive gaze, but also that of Detective Morris, who now displayed his badge. Mrs. Deborah Mendonza, or should I say Deborah Allen, since your marriage to Bernard Mendonza was never formalized, the detective said formally. We have some questions about your activities on this property. I don't know what you're talking about, she replied, quickly composing herself. Who are you really? This is private property, and you are here under false pretenses. Detective Morris Carter, local police force, he replied, showing his badge again. We are here investigating reports of child abuse and attempted fraud. This is absurd. I am a psychologist, specializing in childhood trauma. I'm just helping my stepdaughter overcome her fears. By locking her in the dark, using manipulated recordings of her deceased mother's voice, forcing her into sessions that look more like torture, the detective enumerated, approaching. We have all the evidence, madam. The videos, the documents about the mining, your plans with Victor Davies, and most importantly, samples of what appears to be a mixture of benzodiazepines and other substances you have been administering to Mr. Mendonza. Deborah's face paled momentarily before adopting an expression of defiance. I'll prove this is all a misunderstanding. I am a respected professional, and I have Bernard's own authorization for Louise's treatments. We'll see about that, the detective replied. For now, we need you to accompany us to the police station for questioning. I'm not going anywhere without my lawyer. Deborah crossed her arms, her gaze sweeping the room as if searching for an exit. And where is Louise? What have you done with her? The girl is safe, replied a familiar voice from the front door. Everyone turned to see Bernard Mendonza entering the house, accompanied by Joachim and Mrs. Irene. His face was pale and drawn, but his eyes shone with a clarity he hadn't shown in weeks. Bernard, Deborah exclaimed, trying to run towards him with false concern. Thank goodness you're all right. These men have invaded our house. They're making absurd accusations. Enough lies, Deborah, Bernard interrupted, his voice firm despite his visible tiredness. I know what you've been doing, what you plan to do with my daughter, with me, with our lands. I don't know what you're talking about. You're confused, dear. The doctors said you needed rest, observation. The doctors also said they found traces of non-prescribed medications in my blood. Substances that cause confusion, memory loss, disorientation. Bernard took a step forward, facing her directly. You have been slowly poisoning me while psychologically torturing my daughter. Deborah's smile disappeared completely, replaced by a cold and calculating expression. Where is Victor? She asked, ignoring the accusations and looking at her watch. He should be here with the documents. "Mr. Davies is being detained at this moment by my colleagues in York," the detective informed her. "We found all the documentation about your scheme to take control of the lands and sell them for mining." At that moment, Louise timidly appeared at the door leading to the old cellar, followed by a female police officer who was escorting her. The girl ran into her father's arms as soon as she saw him. "Daddy," she exclaimed, hugging him tightly. "You're back." Bernard knelt, embracing his daughter with tears in his eyes. "Yes, my love, and I'll never let anyone hurt you again." Deborah watched the scene with a mixture of fury and despair. Her meticulously elaborated plans crumbled before her eyes. When the detective approached with handcuffs, she made one last desperate move. "You don't understand," she said, backing towards the back door. "These lands are worth millions with the ore they contain. We're talking about lithium essential for batteries for the country's energy future. What's more important, preserving a family estate or contributing to national development?" "The choice was never that," Bernard replied, standing up while keeping Louise protected by his side. "My lands shelter water sources that supply entire communities. Allowing mining would destroy not only my family's heritage, but also the environmental balance of the entire region." Furthermore, the detective added, "Your methods leave no doubt as to your true motivations. Deborah Allen, you are under arrest for attempted fraud, child abuse, unauthorized administration of controlled substances, and conspiracy." When the detective finally placed the handcuffs on her wrists, Deborah looked directly at Louise with a coldness that made the girl shiver. "You'll never be strong like your mother," she said, in a final act of cruelty. Louise, however, surprised everyone with her answer. Raising her butterfly pendant, she looked firmly at Deborah. "My mother taught me that true. Strength doesn't come from fear or darkness. It comes from love and the courage to face people like you." As Deborah was led out of the house, Mrs. Irene approached Louise and Bernard, her eyes shining with pride and relief. "She hid exactly where we agreed," the housekeeper explained to Bernard. "In the old cellar passage. Do you remember how you two used to play hide-and-seek there when she was little?" Bernard nodded, grateful. "Irene, Sebastian, how can I ever thank you for everything you've done? You saved our lives, our home." "This house is our family too, Master," Sebastian replied simply. "It always will be." As the police finished collecting evidence and testimonies, Bernard led Louise to the estate veranda, where they used to sit together in happier times before Cecilia's loss. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink. "Are you still afraid of the dark?" he asked gently, stroking his daughter's hair. Louise thought for a moment, holding the butterfly pendant. "A little. But Mrs. Irene taught me that even in the deepest dark there's a light within us." Bernard smiled, feeling tears in his eyes. "Your mother used to say something similar." "Daddy?" Louise looked at him with serious eyes. "Can we turn that bad place, the storehouse, into something good?" "Of course, my love. What do you suggest?" "A place for other children who are afraid, but not to scare them, to really help them." Bernard hugged his daughter, feeling a mixture of pain for what she had gone through and hope for what he saw in her resilient heart. "That's a wonderful idea, Louise. We'll do it together." As father and daughter watched the sun set over the sprawling fields of the Palm Grove estate, a blue butterfly momentarily landed on the veranda railing, delicately flapping its wings before taking flight again towards the orange horizon. 6 months passed since that fateful afternoon at the Palm Grove estate. Winter had given way to spring, and the flowering willow trees dotted the property with explosions of yellow and pink color. Where once there was silence and tension, now children's voices and laughter echoed through the fields. The old storehouse, once transformed into a torture chamber, disguised as a therapy room, had been completely remodeled. The metal plates that blocked the windows were removed, replaced by large stained glass windows that filled the space with natural light. The walls, once an aseptic and intimidating white, now displayed murals painted by local artists depicting scenes of English nature, forests, waterfalls, flowering fields. The space, renamed Butterfly House, had become a support center for children facing trauma and loss. Qualified psychologists, supervised by a renowned child therapist from York, conducted individual and group sessions, always based on welcoming and respectful approaches. That Saturday morning, Bernard watched from his study window the preparations for the center's official inauguration event. Colorful tents were set up in the gardens, tables with snacks and drinks, strategically positioned, and a small band tuned their instruments under a leafy tree. "Everything is ready, Master," Sebastian announced, entering the study with a cup of fresh coffee. The butler, now officially promoted to property manager, wore a simple but elegant suit for the occasion. "Thank you, Sebastian, not just for the coffee, but for everything," Bernard replied, accepting the cup with a grateful smile. "Without you and Mrs. Irene—" "No need to thank me," the butler gently interrupted. "As I said that day, this house is our family too." Bernard nodded, moved. The last few months had been intense. Police statements, legal proceedings, medical treatments to eliminate the residues of the substances Deborah had administered, and most importantly, Louise's emotional recovery. "How is our little one today?" he asked, sipping his coffee. "Very excited. She woke up at 5 in the morning and has already changed her clothes 3 times. Mrs. Irene is helping her get ready for her big moment." Bernard smiled. The idea for the center had been Louise's, but the suggestion that she herself speak at the inauguration came from the therapist, Dr. Renata. A way to re-signify the space, transforming it from a source of trauma into a source of pride and accomplishment, the professional had explained. At 10 o'clock, guests began to arrive, local authorities, journalists, families from the region, representatives of child protection institutions, and especially the first children who were already being attended by the center in its experimental phase. Under the shade of a century-old oak tree, a small platform had been set up, with microphones and a banner announcing Butterfly House, Child Support and Development Center. Bernard, dressed with elegant simplicity, went on stage for the opening remarks. Beside him were Detective Maurice Carter, who had become a close friend, Joachim Atherton, who had reassumed his role as the family's lawyer, and Dr. Renata, the center's clinical coordinator. "Good morning, everyone," Bernard began, his voice firm yet emotional. "A few months ago, this estate was a place of shadows and secrets. My daughter Louise and I lived trapped in a web of manipulation and suffering, orchestrated by people who sought only personal gain at the expense of our well-being." A wave of murmurs swept through the audience. The story of the fake therapist and her scheme to take control of the estate had been widely reported, although the most disturbing details about Louise's treatment had been kept confidential to protect the child. "Today," Bernard continued, "we are transforming that painful chapter into a new story. The Butterfly House is born not only as a therapeutic center, but as a symbol of rebirth, of transformation. Just like butterflies which emerge from dark cocoons to fly under the sunlight, we want every child who passes through here to find strength to overcome their fears and traumas." Warm applause followed his words. Bernard gestured towards the main house from where Mrs. Irene emerged, leading Louise by the hand. The girl, now 9 years old, wore a light blue dress with small embroidered butterflies on the skirt. Her dark hair was adorned with a flower tiara, and on her chest, the butterfly pendant that had belonged to her mother shone under the morning sun. As she stepped onto the stage, Louise seemed nervous but determined. When she reached the microphone adjusted to her height, she took a deep breath as she had rehearsed with her therapist. "Hi," she began timidly, but her voice gained firmness. "My name is Louise Mendonza, and this is our Butterfly House. A while ago I was very afraid of the dark. Someone used that fear to try to hurt me, to make me believe I was weak." The audience listened in respectful silence, many with tears in their eyes. "But I learned that being strong doesn't mean not being afraid. It means facing fear, even while trembling. It means asking for help when we need it. It means knowing that we are not alone in the dark." Louise paused, looking at Mrs. Irene, who smiled encouragingly through suppressed tears. "My mother used to say that even in the deepest dark there's a light within us. And it's true. Every person here has that light. That's why we chose butterflies as the symbol of our center, because they pass through the dark of the cocoon before finding their wings and flying under the sun." Bernard watched his daughter with his chest swelling with pride and love. In recent months, with each genuine therapy session, with each night she faced her fears with true support, Louise recovered not only her joy, but also an inner strength that surprised everyone. "Our butterfly house will help other children find their inner light," Louise continued. "It will be a place where no one needs to be ashamed of their fears, where we learn that it's normal to feel sadness when we lose someone we love, and where we discover that we can be strong and fragile at the same time, like the wings of a butterfly, delicate but capable of flying against the wind." When she finished her speech, there wasn't a dry eye in the audience. Louise was met with warm applause and hugged by her father, who could barely contain his emotion. The ceremony proceeded with the ribbon cutting and the presentation of the center's spaces. In the heart of the remodeled building, a special room had been created, the Garden of Lights, a space where children could learn to cope with the fear of the dark gently and respectfully. Small butterfly and star-shaped lanterns were available for the children to take with them, and the walls were covered with special paintings that glowed softly in the dark, creating constellations and magical landscapes. "It was Louise's idea," Dr. Renata explained to visitors. She said that if she had had a light butterfly during her moments of fear, she would have felt less alone. As guests explored the center, Bernard found a moment to talk with Detective Maurice Carter and Joachim Atherton in a quiet corner of the garden. "Any news on the case?" he asked in a low voice. The detective nodded. "The sentence was confirmed yesterday. Deborah received 8 years for multiple charges, including child abuse and attempted fraud. Victor Davies, 10 years with aggravating circumstances for having prior records in similar schemes in other regions." "And the Chinese investors?" Joachim asked. "We managed to trace the front company to an international conglomerate. They claim no knowledge of their local representatives' illegal methods, but investigations are ongoing. The most important thing is that the lands are definitely protected now." Bernard nodded, relieved. In the weeks following Deborah's arrest, he had taken legal measures to transform part of his lands into a private environmental reserve, ensuring permanent protection for the water sources and the local ecosystem. "Thank you, my friends," he said, shaking both their hands. "For everything." In the afternoon, after the official ceremony, the celebration continued with a relaxed lunch in the estate gardens. Children ran among the trees, musicians played cheerful songs, and for the first time in a long time, the Palm Grove estate breathed life and happiness. Louise, surrounded by some of the children who already frequented the center, organized a small ceremony of her own. Each child received a butterfly-shaped lantern and a small pot with a willow plant. "When the willow grows and flowers, you will remember this day," she explained with the adorable seriousness of children who take on important responsibilities. "And whenever you feel afraid, the light butterfly will be with you." As evening fell gently over the Palm Grove estate, the improvised family remained on the old veranda, watching the sunset. Bernard joined them in silence, feeling a peace he hadn't experienced in years. "I think Mommy would have liked the butterfly house," Louise commented, leaning against her father's shoulder. "I'm sure she would, daughter," he replied, kissing the top of her head. "Master," Mrs. Irene said, after a moment of contemplative silence, "I've been thinking, besides the children who come for therapy, perhaps we could expand the project. There are many children in neighboring communities who could benefit from educational activities, art classes, music." "A school?" Sebastian suggested, brightening at the idea. Bernard smiled, feeling truly inspired. "Why not? We have space, resources. We could build classrooms near the center, offer scholarships to children who can't afford it." "We could call it the Cecilia Mendonza School," Louise suggested timidly, "to honor Mommy." Bernard hugged his daughter, moved. "It's a perfect idea, my love." As night fell softly over the Palm Grove estate, the improvised family remained on the veranda, making plans for the future. The old fear of the dark had given way to a new light, not only for Louise, but for all who had been touched by her story. In the sky, the first stars began to shine, and in the garden below, the butterfly-shaped lanterns the children had left behind created points of soft light among the flowers, like small beacons of hope in the darkness. A gentle reminder that even on the darkest nights, there is always a path to the light. In the months and years that followed, the Palm Grove estate transformed into a nationally recognized educational and therapeutic center. The Butterfly House expanded to serve children from all over the county, and the Cecilia Mendonza School became a reference in humanized and inclusive education. Louise grew up strong and compassionate, determined to follow in Dr. Renata's footsteps and become a child psychologist. In her room, she carefully kept a box with newspaper clippings about the center's inauguration, drawings she had made during her recovery, and the first willow tree she had planted, now transferred to a larger pot. And every night, before going to sleep, she still held the butterfly pendant between her fingers, no longer with fear, but as a ritual of gratitude and remembrance. The darkness, which had once been her prison, was now just the peaceful backdrop for colorful dreams of a bright future. The end of the story. Dear listeners, we hope that Louise and Bernard's journey at the Palm Grove estate has touched your hearts. To continue following equally captivating English stories, we have prepared a special playlist that explores other narratives of overcoming and rebirth. Find it by clicking the link to the left of the video. If this story stirred emotions in you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and like the video. Daily, we bring new stories that explore the complexity of life and the strength of the human spirit. We look forward to hearing what you thought of this emotional journey through the Yorkshire estate and its butterflies of light in the comments.